The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is back in session. It is May 27th, 2026, and once again we are going to look at the situation in Ukraine. Now, before I get started with today's update, I want to apologize for not making any videos last week because of the fact that I was busy with a lot of matters that kept me away from doing YouTube. And also, I got a big trip coming up, which will probably keep me away from, this channel for a week or so. June's going to be very busy for me, and yeah, so expect me to not be as active as usual on this channel in the coming month. Now, with that all being said, let's get into the situation on the line of combat contact in Ukraine. First of all, in the direction of the city of Zaporizhzhia, the Russians, especially the group of forces DNEPR, have gotten their asses handed to them by the armed forces of Ukraine. They've been booted out of all these villages here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pavlovka, Lukyanivsky, and Novoyakovlivka, all booted out. And they've also have lost majority control over the town of Primorske as well, which is north of the strategic town of Stepnogorsk. And speaking of which, as you can see here, the Russians have lost supposedly most of Stepnogorsk, including the central commie blocks, but they are still, however, in control of these commie blocks here to the south. I don't know how the Ukrainians have been doing here as of recording this video, but all I can say is that the DNEPR group is kind of trash, and I honestly don't think they're going to really move in this direction again until certain events further to the east bail them out. And speaking of the east, let's talk about it. In the direction of Orikov, which also supposedly used to be the Gulay-Pulay direction, the Russians have continued their offensive on the eastern flank of the city of Zaporizhzhia, even though they're not that close to Zaporizhzhia city yet, at least from this area. They have taken full control, or at least partial control, of the village of Gulay-Polske, and then going to the north, we see that the Russians have finally locked down Verkhna Tersa, and also to the north, they have also established majority control, if not complete control, over the village of Vozdvizhivka. And because of this recent news, the Russians are now in a good position to try to capture the strategic village of Rizdivi-Yanka. And should they be able to take this, then there'll be nothing but them and just a bunch of empty fields before they cut off this road that goes to the strategic town of Orikov, or Orikiv, depending on what your preference is, like on what you want to call it. But none of that matters. The Russians have been basically picking up steam here again, and VOSTOK is pretty much revived. Like, they're actually moving again. Fighting season is well underway. And to make matters even crazier, there are reports that the armed forces of Ukraine have kind of collapsed in the Dnepropetrovsk region. The Vostok group has claimed full control over the village of Doropasove, which is right outside of the town of Pokrovske, and Alexandrovka. Should the Russians be able to take control over Alexandrovka, then they will not only be able to finally get a foothold into Pokrovske, but they would also be able to put an end to all of these counteroffensives by the armed forces of Ukraine in this part of the Dnepropetrovsk region. And then after they're able to clear all this, because here's the thing, the Russians used to control everything here, but then they lost it in the Ukrainian counteroffensive in February. Sorry if I slipped my tongue there because I'm trying to basically be as clear and coherent as possible, but I digress. But yeah, getting back to this area here, the Russians lost all of this in a Ukrainian counterattack in February. And if they're able to retake all these farmlands here, and especially take control of Pokrovsky, then they will then have a shot at taking the strategic town of Prziana. And then also, in addition, they also would then get a shot at taking the town of Chapline right here. They still got some ways to go, but I do believe that after this recent breakthrough here by the Russians in the Dnipropetrovsk region, I believe that the armed forces of Ukraine's counterattack is not only over, but it's about to be completely reversed, which would arguably be one of the Ukrainians' bigger losses in quite some time, since like mid to late 2025. And as you can also see here, Syriac has colored in this so-called death zone here, or gray zone, because it's not clear whether the Russians or the Ukrainians control this area. And even if there were troops from either side, they would all be killed here with the use of FPV drones. So yeah, that's why he's putting this whole area here under a gray zone. And I wouldn't be too surprised if the Ukrainians were not doing as well as many people think they're doing. Something tells me that the Ukrainians may have lied about the true extent of their successes in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and that the Russians may control more than what we're seeing right now on this map. Anatoly Radov, by the way, reported that the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack and retake the villages of Zeleny Gai and Pidobine. But so far, we have seen no successes yet. And then, going to the former Pokrovsk direction, or Krasnaya Amos direction, now Doropila direction, the Russians have continued to advance in the direction of the border village of Sergivka. Well, to be specific, a border village with the Dnipropetrovsk region. And as a result, have captured the village of Vasilovka and Novoalexandrivka. In addition, the Russians have continued their push to take the town of Biletsky, but so far with no reported successes yet. And then going in the direction of Konstantinovka, a lot of good news here is coming in for the Russians. First of all, Dova Bolka, a big chunk of it is now under Russian control, and it wouldn't surprise me if within a few days or so, we see the entire half of this village come under Russian control. And then in the city of Konstantinovka itself, it appears that most, if not all, of the major commie blocks here have fallen to Russian control, along with some private single-family homes too, in southern Konstantinovka, that is. So once the Russians take control over southern Konstantinovka, I honestly don't think they're going to have that much of an issue taking over the northern part of the city, because their best defenses were here. It was like a citadel, a castle, to say the least, like Ugledar. But now that that castle has been lost, well, there's not really much they can do than to just evacuate the city. And also the Russians, in case if you are wondering, they're still a little far away from the local central Rada here in Konstantinovka, but I'm sure they will be able to close in on that within a matter of weeks from now. But yeah, Konstantinovka so far looks pretty cooked for the armed forces of Ukraine, and I'll probably give them another 1 to 2 months before they lose full control of it entirely. Now, going in the direction of Liman, the Ukrainians have continued to try to oust the Russians from the outskirts of Liman itself, and reportedly have recaptured Stavki, but there's no evidence to back up these claims. Ukrainians have also attempted to recapture the village of Zarachny, but so far, again, with no confirmed successes. They have also attempted to do a counteroffensive that would aim to take all these back from the Russians, but so far, with no successes. Rikodub is once again contested, as it always is. And then, going further to the north, in the direction of Kupiansk, The Russians have reportedly taken over a big chunk over Kupiansk-Vozlove, specifically in this part of the city. And there are so far no reports of Ukrainians defending too much of this area, because it's now looking more and more certain that they have lost control over eastern Kupiansk direction. And there's even reports that they are evacuating the southeastern part of the city. They're all like now heading for Kupiansk-Vozlove. I don't know why, but they're leaving Kupiansk proper. And there's also geolocations two posted by the Russians on Telegram that they are retaking more and more of western Kupiansk city, which is the main part of it, that is. And because of that, Ukrainians can now safely assume that they no longer have full control of the city. And I do believe that sometime during the summer, Kupiansk will probably come under full Russian control and the battle will be over for this city. And I'm sure the Russians cannot wait to move on from Kupiansk. Now, going into the northern Kharkiv direction, the Russians have reportedly captured the village of Shistorivka, but so far, there's not enough evidence to confirm those reports. Velcha is back under Ukrainian control, along with Tishilne, Liman, and Sinelnikove are both contested by the Ukrainians again. And Ukrainians have even tried, and so far have not succeeded, in retaking parts of the city of Volchansk, which is in complete ruins, by the way, like as of right now. Now, even though this map suggests Volchansk is in one piece, I am so sorry to tell you that Volchansk is not in good condition. In fact, the city is gone, wiped off the map. And as you can see here, all of these villages along the Volcha River are all coming under Russian control. Pokalyani is under Russian control. Zibino, there's a report that Volokivka is now under Russian control too, but so far no confirmation. Bachkovo, Chakivka, and even Karachiny are all rumored to be under Russian control, but again, with no evidence to back up these claims. Okurumivka will probably be contested a little longer, like just a little more, but it will come under Russian control soon as well. Rebelchine is, I think this was a confirmed capture a while back. Mala Volcha is not yet contested, but I'm sure it will be sometime during June. And then, yeah, you have all these villages here that the Russians have not entered yet, but I'm sure they're going to sometime next month as we get into, like, the main event of summer 2026. And then going further to the west, we have news coming in that the Russians, after taking control over the village of Viturine, that they have captured Khryniv, also in the Kharkiv region. With the capture of this village, we can safely assume that Shevchenka will probably come under their control soon as well. And then after that, we can see the start for the Battle of Kozacha-Lopan, which would be the biggest settlement in this part of the Kharkiv region that the Russians would try to take control of after Volchansk, Kupiansk, I guess, and Dvorichna. So, yeah, they're looking to take control over Kozacha-Lopan, and then once they're able to do that, they'll be able to connect their border bridgehead here to this, and then they're going to try to take control of all these lands here within the northern Kharkiv direction. And then after that, they'll try to aim for the strategic town of Zolochiv, which has some commie blocks here, as you can see. Now, going to the Sumy region, this will be the last part of the video, by the way. Rizne is now under complete Russian control after a month or so of clashes. And then you have reports coming in that after the capture of Myropilia from the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Zapsilia is now under Russian control as well, though Syriac has not painted it in red quite yet. But I do believe that these claims are true, and despite the Ukrainians' claims that they still control all of these areas here, including Myropilia, I don't honestly know if it's worth believing them because of the fact that Deep State, for instance, is ran by the SBU, and they like to deliberately spread around disinformation in order to throw off some people from knowing, like, the true progress of both Russia and Ukraine are on the front line. Well, obviously for the benefit of Ukraine. Like, of course. And last but not least, there's a report that the Russians, after capturing Mala Korchkivka and Korchkivka itself, they have reportedly entered Pisarivka too, which is adjacent to the strategic town of Khotan. Should the Russians be able to capture Pisarivka, they will then be on the main northern road going into the city of Sumy, right here. Like, Sumy City will be directly within fire range, and then they just got to get past all these forested areas here, which I do think, believe it or not, is a blessing for the Russians, because then there won't be that many drone strikes raining upon them here, and because of that, they should be able to advance here more easily. And then they have to capture the suburb of Sumy known as Stetskivka. And should they be able to capture this, then the Russians are already effectively in Sumy. Nothing will stop them. They're literally going to already be in Sumy, and then the battle for the city will begin, though I'm expecting it to be a long, grinding battle like we saw with Artyomovsk, aka Bakhmut, like, I guess, Pokrovsk. I can expect it, honestly, to be as long as that, or perhaps Avdiivka. It will definitely be a long battle once they reach the city of Sumy, though I'm not so sure yet if they do want to actually enter it at this time, because they still need to capture this whole forested area outside of Sumy, like the eastern flank of it, before they go in. But if they do go for it, like, sooner than we think, like we expect them to, like from the north, then that would be quite the surprise of 2026. Though I'm not expecting them to do that anytime soon. The Russians have not been this close to Sumy City in over 4 years, and should they be able to enter it, like even enter it, it will be quite a bad look for the Ukrainians, and especially Volodymyr Zelensky, who's trying to convince the US government and Europe that he now holds the cards, like that he's now winning the war in Ukraine. But with all these news coming out from the border regions of Kharkiv and Sumy regions, I honestly don't think the Ukrainians are anywhere close to victory than they were 3-4 years ago. They're just not. So, nothing pretty much going on here. Within the Glukov direction, within Sumy. And then, one more thing before I get going. The Russians recently struck the city of Kiev really hard, like a few or so days ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if they keep striking the city of Kiev for a simple reason. Because Ukrainians have been harassing multiple Western Russian cities for a while, including the likes of Voronezh, Rostov-on-Don, especially Crimea. I think Bryansk too. And I don't know where it is within Rostov-on-Don. Oh, I think I found it. Taganrog. Yeah. They've been striking these cities closer to the border with Ukraine, like within Russia itself, in order to like fuck up their logistics. And Ukrainians are even screwing up logistics too with the use of drones between Crimea and Mariupol, but also the eastern side of the Kherson region, which is currently occupied by Russia. So the Russians are striking back at the Ukrainians hard. And to be quite honest with you guys, if they keep doing this like 3 to 4 more times throughout the summer, I honestly don't know if the Ukrainians can continue on to do what they've been doing in Ukraine for the last couple of years or so. All good things must come to an end at some point. So that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it, found it informative, if not somewhat entertaining, and I'll see you guys next time. So take good care of yourselves, and peace out.